sandwich bread. So this recipe is a really great beginner bread recipe. If you've never made bread before, it's a great advanced recipe as well if you make bread all the time. I actually make this recipe every weekend and it's our bread for the week, so I usually never buy bread from the store. It costs about $1.70 per loaf to make. That's at least in my area. It might be different in yours, but I really enjoy making this recipe. It's great for toasting, it's great for sandwiches, and it is one of those frugal recipes that you can use if you have some basic ingredients on hand. So with that, let's get started.
So the first thing we're going to do is prepare our liquid ingredients. We are going to add our milk, our butter, and our honey to a small pot, and we're going to warm it just until the butter melts, and then we're going to allow it to cool until it's blood temperature. So when you stick your finger inside the warm milk, stick your clean finger inside the warm milk, it shouldn't feel hot and it shouldn't feel cold. We're then going to start with our dry ingredients. We're going to add our yeast, our flour, and our salt to the bowl of a stand mixer. You can do this by hand as well. I just happen to use my stand mixer when I do it. And I'm going to give those all a really good whisk before I go ahead and add my wet ingredients. Go ahead and add your wet ingredients once they have gotten to blood temperature or lukewarm. And then we're going to start the kneading process. So you want to get all of the ingredients incorporated together before you start the timer. And you're going to want to knead them for 7 minutes if you're using the stand mixer and 10 minutes if you're kneading by hand. This dough is quite a wet dough. You want it to be tacky, but you don't want it to be really sticky. It will stick a little bit, but you don't want it to be like wet. What we're going to do once the kneading time is over is we are just going to scrape it off the sides of the bowl so that it forms a ball, and then we're going to cover it with either some plastic wrap, or I've got a plastic reusable cover that I use, and we're going to set it aside for about an hour until it doubles in size. Once the dough has proofed and doubled in size, I'm going to go ahead and grease my 9x5 inch loaf pan, and then I'm going to gently press down the dough until we've released some of that air that's been trapped during the proofing process. We're then going to take our dough out of our mixing bowl, and we're going to give it a little bit of a knead. I've just put a little bit of oil onto my hands and onto my scraper just because it was sticking a little bit too much. Usually you don't have to do this, but I decided on this day that I was going to do it just because it was getting a little bit too sticky. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press my dough ball into a rectangle, and I want to make it about as wide as the loaf tin that I'm going to bake this bread in. The reason I'm doing this is so I can make a really secure roll, dough roll, and it just gives a little bit more consistency to the rise when it's rising in your tin, and also secures the texture of the bread and the shape of the bread a little bit more nicely than if I just sort of gotten the dough and just placed it straight into my loaf tin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll up that rectangle, and I'm going to pinch together the edges after each roll just to keep them nice and secure and make sure that that roll is really nice and tight. And I'm going to do that all the way until I get to the end. When we get to the end, I'm just going to go ahead and pinch the seam together, and that's going to be the bottom of our loaf. So the top is going to be beautifully smooth, and then I'm going to roll in the two sides just so, and pinch those in as well. Cool. So there we go, we have a beautiful loaf, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it now into our greased tin. And I have a non-stick tin, but if you don't, you can always use some baking paper and put some baking paper in there as well to make sure that it doesn't stick. After that, what we need to do is we're going to go ahead and put our plastic wrap or our plastic cover on there. I make sure that it's not touching the dough. If you're using plastic wrap, oil the plastic wrap a little bit so that it doesn't stick, otherwise you'll have a tough time getting it off. And we're going to go ahead and make it rise for another half an hour just to get it nice and risen before we put it in the oven. After the half an hour, you'll see that it's really risen and taken up the full loaf tin. And we're not going to do anything else to the loaf other than put it in a preheated 180 to 200 degree oven. And we're going to bake it until it is golden brown. You'll know that the bread is done when it comes out of the oven and you can tap it and it sounds hollow inside. I also like to invert it out of the tin and tap it on the bottom just to make sure that it still sounds hollow and it's nice and done. If it isn't, put it back into the oven until you can tap it and it sounds hollow.
Thank you so much for staying until the end. This is a really wonderful bread recipe that is soft and it stores really well in an airtight container. If you choose to make it, please leave us a comment. Give us a big thumbs up if you like this recipe, and I'll see you next Friday for another frugal video. Bye!